Before we begin tonight's journey into the unknown, I want to ask for your support. If you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you could possibly know, and allows us to continue bringing you these deep dives into the mysteries that keep us awake at night. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review truly makes a difference. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing our community spread across different time zones and continents. If this type of content resonates with you, subscribing helps us reach more curious minds like yours. A special thank you to Johnson and Built-in Suspicion for suggesting tonight's topic. This is one that challenges everything we think we know about time, memory, and the boundaries of classified research. Now settle in, turn down the lights, let your mind drift to a place where the impossible becomes uncomfortably plausible. What if time travel did not begin with machines in some distant future, but with children in the recent past? What if the Cold War produced not just nuclear arsenals and satellite networks, but doorways through time itself? What if there was a boy who stepped outside the normal flow of history and returned with memories no one was prepared to believe? This is the story of Andrew Basiago and Project Pegasus. A story that exists in that shadowy space between documented history and unprovable testimony. A story that, if true, would rewrite everything we understand about the limits of human technology and the ethics of government secrecy. Tonight, we examine a claim that sounds like science fiction but is presented as buried fact. We will not tell you what to believe. We will only ask you to consider what might have been possible in the depths of the Cold War, when fear and ambition pushed the boundaries of acceptable. Research further than most of us can imagine. The question is not whether you believe this story. The question is whether you can prove it never happened. Chapter 1. America in the Cold War Mindset. To understand why Project Pegasus feels plausible to so many, we must first understand the world that allegedly created it. The late 1960s and early 1970s represented a unique moment in American history. The Cold War was not just a political standoff. It was an existential terror that permeated every level of government, military and scientific research. The Soviet Union was not simply an adversary. They were an ever-present threat that could end civilization within minutes. In this environment, the impossible became routine. Projects that would seem like pure fantasy were given billion-dollar budgets and top-secret classifications. The logic was simple and terrifying. If we do not develop it first, they will. Consider what we now know was happening during this era. The Central Intelligence Agency was dosing unsuspecting citizens with hallucinogenic drugs in Operation MKUltra, attempting to create mind control techniques and chemical interrogation methods. The military was exposing soldiers to radiation to study its effects on human tissue. The Air Force was developing aircraft that defied known principles of aerodynamics, leading to decades of UFO sightings that were actually classified test flights. These were not conspiracy theories. These were documented programs that remained hidden for decades before declassification forced their acknowledgement. Each one seemed impossible when first alleged. Each one was dismissed as paranoid fantasy by serious people, and each one turned out to be real. The pattern is important because it establishes a framework for understanding Project Pegasus. When someone claims the government was experimenting with time travel using children as test subjects, the natural response is disbelief. But that disbelief rests on an assumption that certain lines would never be crossed, certain ethics would never be violated, certain technologies would never be pursued. History shows us those assumptions are dangerously naive. During the Cold War, the American government operated on a principle that can be summarized in a single phrase: whatever it takes. If defeating the Soviets required breaking conventional morality, then morality would be reclassified as a peacetime luxury. If it required technologies that seemed to violate the laws of physics, then physics would be pushed until it broke or bent. The Manhattan Project had already proven that seemingly impossible technologies could be developed in secret and deployed before the public even knew they existed. Atomic weapons went from theoretical physics to city-destroying reality in less than 5 years. What else might have been developed in those classified laboratories scattered across the American Southwest? The answer, according to conventional history, is advanced aircraft, satellite systems, cryptography and computing technology. But conspiracy researchers ask a different question. What else was being developed that never made it into the declassified files? Time travel research fits perfectly into this framework. If the Soviets were pursuing temporal manipulation, the Americans would have no choice but to pursue it as well. The strategic advantage of viewing future events or altering past outcomes would be so overwhelming that no amount of ethical concern could prevent the research. And if such research required experimental subjects who could withstand the psychological trauma of temporal displacement, who better than children? Their minds were still forming, still adaptable, still capable of accepting realities that would shatter adult consciousness. This is not to say Project Pegasus definitely existed. It is to say that the world it allegedly existed in was exactly the kind of world that would have created it. The Cold War was not a time of restraint. It was a time when restraint was seen as a path to national suicide. When Andrew Basiago came forward with his claims decades later, he was not describing a project that seemed out of place in Cold War America. He was describing exactly the kind of program that paranoid, desperate, technologically ambitious superpowers would have pursued if they believed it was possible. The question is not whether the Cold War government would have attempted time travel research. The question is whether they succeeded. Chapter 2. The alleged program Project Pegasus, according to those who claim it existed, was not a single experiment or a unified research facility. It was an umbrella designation for multiple interconnected programs exploring the boundaries of time, space and human consciousness. The alleged operational period spans from the late 1960s through the mid-1970s. This time frame is significant. It falls precisely between the peak of Cold War paranoia and the beginning of congressional oversight reforms that would later expose programs like MKUltra. It was a window of maximum secrecy and minimum accountability. The stated goals of Project Pegasus, as described by Andrew Basiago and others who claim involvement, were threefold: time viewing, time travel, and teleportation. Each of these objectives builds on the others, suggesting a graduated approach to temporal manipulation. Time viewing would allow observers to witness past events without physically travelling to them. Imagine a technology that could tune into specific moments in history, like changing television channels. Military intelligence applications would be obvious. Historical mysteries could be solved. Enemy activities in the recent past could be monitored and analysed. Time travel went further, allowing physical displacement of objects and potentially people across temporal boundaries. This was not the science fiction fantasy of elaborate machines and dramatic special effects. According to the claims, it was achieved through classified physics research related to electromagnetic fields and what some have called quantum teleportation. Teleportation represented the spatial component, allowing instant transport across geographic distances. The theory suggests this was actually easier to achieve than temporal displacement, serving as a proving ground for the more complex time travel experiments. None of this appears in official government records. There are no declassified Project Pegasus documents. No former officials have confirmed its existence through traditional channels. No physical evidence has emerged from alleged test sites. This absence of evidence creates a perfect conspiracy scenario. Supporters argue that deep classification and document destruction would ensure no paper trail survives. Critics point to this same absence as proof that nothing happened. Both positions are logically consistent with the available facts, which means resolution is impossible without new evidence. What does exist is testimony. Andrew Basiago has spoken extensively and consistently about his alleged involvement. He describes being recruited as a young child, the son of a man who worked in classified government research. His accounts include specific details about locations, technologies, and other participants. The technology itself, as described, sounds like physics fiction. Basiago speaks of something called a chronovisor, allegedly developed with input from Nikola Tesla before his death, and later refined by government scientists. This device supposedly created a form of holographic time window, allowing viewers to observe past events. For actual time travel, the descriptions become more complex. Basiago describes standing chambers that generated intense electromagnetic fields, creating what he calls a temporal vortex. The experience of travelling through these fields was reportedly disorienting and physically uncomfortable, leaving participants temporarily dislocated from normal time perception. Teleportation allegedly used similar principles, but focused on spatial rather than temporal coordinates. Basiago claims to have been instantly transported from facilities on the East Coast to locations across the country, sometimes as a way of preparing participants for the more extreme disorientation of time travel. The program allegedly involved multiple children, not just Basiago. He has named other participants over the years, though few have come forward to confirm his accounts. This could mean they were never involved, or it could mean they remain bound by secrecy agreements or personal choice to stay silent. What makes Project Pegasus particularly compelling to conspiracy researchers is how it fits into the known patterns of classified research. The time frame aligns with documented excesses of intelligence agencies. The technology, while advanced, does not violate physics so much as push it into speculative but theoretically possible territory. The use of children as test subjects echoes documented radiation experiments and drug testing programs. If someone were going to invent a fake government conspiracy, they would likely make it more spectacular, more dramatic, more filled with obvious villains and clear evidence. Project Pegasus feels uncomfortably plausible, precisely because it is presented with bureaucratic mundanity. It was allegedly just another classified program run by serious researchers pursuing strategic objectives. The most disturbing element is not the technology, but the ethics. If the government was indeed experimenting with temporal displacement using children, it represents a profound violation of everything we claim to value about childhood innocence and informed consent. Yet it also represents exactly the kind of calculation Cold War planners would have made if they believed the strategic payoff justified. The moral cost. This is the heart of the conspiracy. Not whether time travel was scientifically possible in the 1970s, but whether the government would have pursued it anyway, using whatever methods seemed most likely to succeed, regardless of the human cost. Chapter 3. Why Children Were Chosen. Perhaps no aspect of the project, Pegasus claims, disturbs people more than the alleged use of children as experimental subjects. It crosses a moral line so profound that many dismiss the entire story based solely on this element. Yet it is precisely this disturbing detail that some researchers find most convincing. According to Andrew Basiago, children were specifically selected for temporal displacement experiments because of their psychological adaptability. Adult minds, he claims, could not process the experience of existing outside normal temporal flow without suffering severe mental breakdowns. Children, with their still-forming cognitive frameworks and natural acceptance of impossible things, could endure what adults could not. This explanation is both horrifying and logically consistent with what we know about developmental psychology. Children exist in a state of continuous cognitive adaptation. Their understanding of reality is not fixed. They regularly encounter phenomena that seem impossible by adult logic, and simply incorporate these experiences into their expanding worldview. An adult transported backward in time would struggle with the philosophical implications, the paradoxes, the challenge to their fixed understanding of causality and free will. A child, lacking that rigid framework, might simply experience it as a strange new place and adapt accordingly. The alleged program reportedly recruited children whose parents had security clearances and connections to classified research. This served multiple purposes. First, it provided cover. A child accompanying their parent to a research facility would not raise suspicions. Second, it created natural compartmentalization. Parents with clearances understood the importance of secrecy and would not press their children for details about activities at secure locations. Basiago describes being 7 years old when his involvement began. He recalls his father explaining that he would be participating in important work for the country, but could not discuss it with anyone. This framing turned participation into a patriotic duty, something to be proud of even if it had to remain secret. The children were allegedly prepared gradually, starting with simple tests and psychological evaluations, moving toward more intense experiences as their ability to cope was demonstrated. The program did not begin by throwing children through time portals. It built up slowly, creating psychological resilience through repeated exposure to increasingly disorienting experiences. This graduated approach appears in many documented human experimentation programs from the era. MKUltra employed similar methods, starting with mild doses and building toward more extreme exposures. The logic was both practical and coldly scientific. You develop tolerance through incremental increases while monitoring for breaking points. The selection criteria reportedly included emotional stability, intelligence, and what some might call imaginative flexibility. Children who could accept strange experiences without panic, who could think quickly in disorienting situations, who could maintain composure when normal rules seemed to stop applying. From a strategic perspective, using children made another kind of sense. If temporal displacement did cause psychological damage, it was better to risk young minds that might recover through developmental plasticity than to damage trained adult intelligence officers or scientists. The children were, in essence, canaries in a temporal coal mine. This framing is deeply unethical by modern standards. It treats children as expendable resources in service of strategic objectives. Yet it's entirely consistent with Cold War logic, which regularly sacrificed individual welfare for perceived national security benefits. The conspiracy theory suggests that Project Pegasus was not unique in using children as experimental subjects. Other programs from the same era have been documented doing the same thing. The nuclear testing programs exposed children to radiation. The nutrition studies withheld food from orphans. The psychological warfare research traumatized institutionalized youth. What made Pegasus different was only the nature of the experiment, not the willingness to experiment on children. If time travel research was happening, children would have been obvious subjects. Their use was not a deviation from Cold War ethics. It was a natural extension of them. Andrew Basiago has spoken about the lasting effects of his alleged participation. He describes occasional temporal disorientation, moments where he feels slightly out of sync with the present moment. He talks about memories that seem too vivid, too detailed, as if they were downloaded rather than naturally formed. Whether these experiences are real memories of time travel or false memories created through some other process, they represent trauma. Something happened to create these persistent effects. The question is whether that something was truly temporal displacement or something else entirely. The use of children serves another purpose in the conspiracy narrative. It makes the story harder to verify or debunk. Children remember experiences differently than adults. Their memories are more malleable, more susceptible to suggestion, but also sometimes more accurate in capturing emotional truth over factual detail. If you wanted to create a program that could never be definitively proven or disproven, using child participants would be strategically brilliant. Their testimony as adults would always be questioned. Their memories would always be suspect. The very thing that made them useful as subjects makes them unreliable as witnesses. This is the darkest implication of Project Pegasus. Not just that children were used, but that their use was designed to ensure permanent deniability. Chapter 4. The Time Jumps. Andrew Basiago describes his alleged time travel experiences with a level of detail that either indicates genuine memory or an extraordinarily consistent fabrication. The accounts lack the spectacular quality of science fiction, focusing instead on disorientation, confusion, and brief exposure to other time periods. According to his claims, the actual process of temporal displacement was not pleasant. He describes being led into a chamber standing on designated spots marked on the floor and experiencing an intense electromagnetic sensation as the equipment activated. The transition was not instantaneous from his perspective. He felt stretched, as if his consciousness was being pulled through a narrow opening, while his physical form struggled to follow. The destinations were apparently not always chosen by the participants. Some jumps were to specific historical events for observation purposes. Others seemed more experimental, testing whether stable arrival points could be established at particular temporal coordinates. The trips were brief, usually lasting only minutes from the subjective perspective of the traveller. though the external time displacement could be substantial. Basiago claims to have been sent to multiple historical periods. He describes briefly experiencing the atmosphere of different eras, the strange quality of the light, the unfamiliar sounds and smells. But these were not extended stays. The program allegedly focused on proving the technology worked rather than conducting lengthy historical observation missions. The sensory distortion was reportedly severe. Colours appeared slightly wrong, as if seen through a filter that did not quite match normal perception. Sounds seemed to arrive at odd intervals, slightly out of sync with visual input. The very air felt different, creating a persistent sense of wrongness that made extended stays psychologically difficult. Time travellers allegedly experienced temporal jet lag, a profound disorientation that lasted for hours or even days after returning to their native timeline. They would feel disconnected from the present moment, as if watching themselves act from a slight delay. Objects would seem to exist in multiple positions simultaneously until the temporal echoes faded. The destinations included not just past historical events, but also possible future timelines. This aspect of the claims becomes particularly controversial because it suggests the program was not just viewing fixed history, but exploring branching possibilities. The implication is that the future is not determined, that multiple potential timelines exist simultaneously, and that travellers could observe different versions of what might come to be. Basiago has described arriving at future coordinates and finding landscapes that seemed both familiar and alien, technological advances that made no sense from his current perspective, social structures that had evolved in unexpected directions. He claims these glimpses were fragmentary and confusing, like trying to understand a movie by seeing random 5-minute clips out of sequence. The most striking element of these accounts is their lack of drama. There were no desperate escapes from dinosaurs, no meetings with famous historical figures, no grand adventures through time. Instead, there was bureaucratic process, experimental protocol, careful documentation, and a focus on proving the technology worked rather than exploiting it for spectacular purposes. This mundane quality actually strengthens the conspiracy case for some researchers. Real classified programs are boring. They involve extensive testing, careful measurement, risk mitigation, and incremental progress. If Project Pegasus were a fabrication, it would likely be more exciting. The jumps allegedly had rules and limitations. Travellers could not interact extensively with the destination time period. They were instructed to observe, not interfere. The concern was not just about creating temporal paradoxes, but about drawing attention that might create historical records of impossible visitors. Participants were told to dress in ways that would blend into their destination period, or to stay hidden during their brief stays. The program apparently learned early that travellers standing out in historical photographs or written records created unnecessary complications for maintaining secrecy. Basiago describes the psychological impact of experiencing time as something fluid rather than fixed. For people who grew up understanding history as a settled sequence of unchangeable events, witnessing those events from outside their natural context was profoundly unsettling. It made the past feel less real, less solid, less certain. The return to normal time was reportedly as disorienting as the departure. Travellers would arrive back in the originating chamber feeling as if they had been gone for hours, only to be told only minutes had passed. Or the reverse would happen, creating a temporal debt where they had experienced minutes, but lost hours from the objective timeline. These experiences allegedly created lasting changes in how participants perceived time and memory. They would sometimes feel echoes of the places they had visited, as if part of their consciousness remained slightly displaced, still experiencing those other moments. Dreams would mix memories from different time periods, creating confusion about what was past, present, or future. The program apparently included debriefing sessions where participants would describe everything they experienced, while researchers took careful notes. The focus was on verifying temporal coordinates, establishing the reliability of the equipment, and documenting any anomalies that might indicate instabilities in the temporal displacement field. Some jumps were reportedly unsuccessful, sending travellers to incorrect time periods, or failing to achieve full displacement. These failures were studied carefully, treated as learning opportunities rather than disasters, as long as the travellers returned safely. The safety record itself is interesting from a conspiracy perspective. If the program existed, the absence of public accidents or disasters suggests either extraordinary safety protocols or complete success in covering up failures. Both scenarios are plausible within the context of deeply classified research programs. What makes these time jump accounts compelling to believers is their consistency over decades of testimony. Basiago has told essentially the same story, with the same level of detail since first coming forward. His accounts do not grow more elaborate with retelling. They remain focused on the mundane, uncomfortable, carefully controlled reality of experimental time travel. Whether these memories represent actual temporal displacement experiences or something else entirely, they clearly represent something significant in Basiago's consciousness. The question is not whether he believes what he is saying. The question is whether what he believes corresponds to objective historical fact. Chapter 5. The Lincoln Photograph. Of all the claims Andrew Basiago has made about Project Pegasus, none has generated more attention or skepticism than his assertion that he appears in a photograph from the Gettysburg Address. This single claim brings the entire conspiracy theory into focus, because it offers something most conspiracy theories cannot provide: potentially verifiable physical evidence. The photograph in question shows a crowd gathered to hear Abraham Lincoln deliver his famous address in November of 1863. It is a grainy, distant shot taken with the primitive photography equipment of the era. Among the figures in the crowd, partially obscured and difficult to make out, is what appears to be a child standing in an unusual position. Basiago claims that child is him. He says he was sent to Gettysburg as part of the Project Pegasus experiments, briefly displaced to one of the most significant moments in American history. The purpose was allegedly to test whether temporal coordinates could be precisely targeted to specific historical events. The claim is extraordinary. If true, it would provide incontrovertible proof that time travel is not only possible, but has actually been achieved. A child from the 1970s appearing in a photograph from the 1860s would be evidence that cannot be explained away by psychological factors or false memory. The problem is that the evidence is far from clear. The photograph is of poor quality by modern standards. The figure Basiago identifies as himself is small, distant, and lacks defining features. Photographs from this era show hundreds of people in period clothing who could potentially be identified as anyone by someone motivated to see a particular person. Professional historians have examined the photograph and found nothing unusual about the child figure. Period clothing was distinctive but widely worn. A child in the crowd at a major presidential speech was entirely normal for the era. There is no evidence of temporal displacement in the image itself. Skeptics point out that people regularly see patterns in ambiguous images. The human brain is designed to find familiar faces and forms, even in random visual noise. This pareidolia effect explains why people see religious figures in toast or alien faces in rock formations. It could easily explain why someone expecting to find their younger self in a historical photograph would identify a vague, child-shaped blur as confirmation. Basiago has offered detailed analysis of the photograph, pointing out what he interprets as anachronistic elements in the child's positioning and appearance. He claims the clothing does not quite match the period, that the posture suggests someone uncomfortable and out of place, that the location within the crowd indicates someone who arrived by unusual means rather than walking to the event. Professional costume historians dispute these interpretations. The clothing appears consistent with working-class children's attire from the period. The posture could be explained by fatigue, boredom, or simple individual variation in how people stand. The location in the crowd proves nothing about how the child arrived. From a conspiracy theory perspective, the Gettysburg photograph is both the strongest and weakest element of the Project Pegasus claims. It is strongest because it offers something concrete, something people can examine and debate. It moves the discussion from pure speculation into analysis of potential physical evidence. It is weakest because the evidence does not actually support the claim. The photograph shows a child who could be anyone. Without additional context or corroborating evidence, identifying that figure as a time traveller from the future requires accepting the conclusion before examining the evidence. What makes the claim psychologically compelling is the specificity. Basiago does not just claim he time travelled, he claims he time travelled to a specific place at a specific moment, and that photographic evidence exists to prove it. This level of detail either indicates genuine memory or a commitment to fabrication that goes beyond typical conspiracy theories. The Gettysburg claim also highlights the verification problem inherent in time travel conspiracies. How would someone prove they time travelled? If they appeared in historical photographs, skeptics would claim the photographs are misinterpreted or faked. If they brought back artifacts, those would be dismissed as forgeries. If they shared knowledge of future events, it would be attributed to lucky guesses or access to classified information. In other words, even if time travel were real, and someone had participated in temporal displacement experiments, proving it to a skeptical public would be nearly impossible. The very nature of the claim makes it resistant to verification. This creates a perfect conspiracy theory scenario. Believers point to the photograph and see confirmation. Skeptics point to the same photograph and see pareidolia. Both positions are logically defensible given the quality of the evidence. Basiago has never wavered from his identification of himself in the photograph. He has maintained this claim through years of ridicule and criticism. This persistence either indicates absolute conviction in false memory or genuine memory of an extraordinary experience. The Lincoln photograph serves another purpose in the conspiracy narrative. It anchors Project Pegasus to real history in a way that abstract claims about time travel cannot. It gives people something concrete to debate, something that exists outside of testimony and recovered memory. It makes the entire theory feel more substantial, even if the evidence itself is ambiguous. What remains is uncertainty. The photograph exists. It shows a crowd at Gettysburg. Among that crowd is a child figure that could be anyone. Whether that figure is actually Andrew Basiago from the future cannot be proven or disproven from the image alone. This uncertainty is where conspiracy theories thrive. In the space between proof and debunking, imagination fills the gaps with possibilities that feel more compelling than mundane explanations. Chapter 6. The technology question. For Project Pegasus to have existed as claimed, it required technology that mainstream science insists was and remains impossible. This technological impossibility is often cited as definitive proof that the entire story is fabricated, yet the relationship between classified research and public scientific knowledge is more complex than this objection suggests. According to the claims surrounding Project Pegasus, the temporal displacement technology built on theoretical physics research that was already underway in the 1960s. Specifically, it allegedly drew from work on electromagnetic fields, quantum entanglement, and what some researchers were beginning to explore about the nature of time itself. The chronovisor, the time-viewing device supposedly used in the program, was allegedly based on principles developed by Nikola Tesla before his death. Tesla's final papers and research notes were seized by the United States government immediately after he died, classified at the highest levels, and have never been fully released to the public. What was in those documents remains a subject of speculation. Conspiracy researchers point out that Tesla was working on revolutionary concepts involving electromagnetic resonance, wireless energy transmission, and manipulation of fundamental forces. If some of his final theoretical work dealt with temporal manipulation or viewing across time, the government would have had obvious reasons to classify it permanently. The technology for physical time travel allegedly worked on different principles. Basiago describes intense electromagnetic fields generated by equipment that occupied entire rooms. These fields supposedly created what he calls a temporal vortex, essentially a controlled distortion of the space-time continuum that could be navigated by travellers. Mainstream physics considers this impossible with any known technology. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical, potentially exceeding the total output of existing power infrastructure. Creating stable temporal displacement would require solving problems that remain purely theoretical even today. Yet critics of this criticism point to the history of classified aerospace development. The public did not know stealth aircraft were possible until they were already operational. The true capabilities of reconnaissance satellites remained classified for decades. Technologies that seemed impossible were being developed and deployed, while the public remained convinced they were science fiction. The strategic value of time manipulation technology cannot be overstated. If it worked even partially, even unreliably, even at enormous cost, it would be worth pursuing. The ability to view future enemy actions, to verify historical intelligence, to transport assets across time as well as space, would provide advantages so overwhelming that the Cold War context makes the research seem not just plausible, but inevitable. The theoretical physics of time travel has evolved significantly since the 1970s. What was considered pure fantasy then has become speculative but mathematically consistent theory now. Einstein's equations allow for closed time-like curves under certain extreme conditions. Quantum mechanics introduces observer effect and superposition states that challenge our understanding of causality. None of this proves time travel is practically achievable, but it suggests that the theoretical foundations the alleged Project Pegasus researchers were working from were not as far outside mainstream physics as skeptics often claim. They were working at the edge of what was theoretically possible, which is exactly where classified research programs tend to operate. The technology descriptions provided by Basiago include details that either indicate genuine knowledge of advanced physics or very careful research into how such technology might theoretically work. He describes electromagnetic phasing, temporal coordinate calculations, return vector establishment, and other concepts that align with speculative physics papers from the period. Supporters of the conspiracy theory argue that absence of public technology is not proof the technology does not exist in classified form. They point to the decades-long gap between military development of advanced systems and their eventual public acknowledgement. They note that quantum computing, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence all existed in classified programs long before the public knew they were possible. Critics counter that time travel is fundamentally different from advanced computing or genetics. It is not just an engineering challenge, but a potential violation of causality itself. The paradoxes alone would make it unstable or impossible. If someone could travel to the past, they could prevent their own birth, create logical contradictions that make the entire concept incoherent. The conspiracy response is that these paradoxes might explain why time travel research remains classified. If it works but creates unavoidable paradoxes or timeline branching, the implications for free will, causality, and the nature of reality would be so profound that governments would never acknowledge it. The technology would be simultaneously the most powerful tool imaginable and the most dangerous truth humanity could face. Another technological aspect involves the precision required for temporal targeting. Arriving at the Gettysburg Address rather than a random point in November of 1863 would require calculations accounting for the Earth's position in orbit, the planet's rotation, the movement of the solar system through the galaxy, and the expansion of the universe itself. The mathematics involved would be staggeringly complex. Basiago has mentioned that early jumps sometimes missed their temporal targets, arriving at the wrong dates or even wrong locations. This suggests the technology was experimental and imperfect, which aligns with what we would expect from first-generation classified research. The failures were learning experiences, gradually improving the precision of the targeting systems. The energy requirements remain a central challenge to the plausibility of the claims. Displacing matter through time would require enormous power, potentially beyond what any portable or even facility-based system could generate. Unless, of course, the technology found ways to tap into energy sources or manipulation techniques not acknowledged by public physics. Zero-point energy, vacuum fluctuations, quantum tunneling effects. These theoretical concepts were beginning to be explored in the late 1960s. If any of them provided pathways to the energy levels needed for temporal manipulation, they would have been investigated by classified research programs regardless of mainstream scientific skepticism. What remains is technological uncertainty that mirrors the historical uncertainty. We cannot prove the technology existed because we cannot examine equipment or documentation that may never have existed or may remain classified. We cannot prove it did not exist because the nature of classification means breakthrough technologies can remain hidden for indefinite periods. The technology question, like all aspects of Project Pegasus, ultimately comes down to what someone chooses to believe about the limits of government research and the boundaries of possible physics. Chapter 7. Why no records exist. The complete absence of official documentation is perhaps the most damning evidence against Project Pegasus. No declassified files mention the program. No whistleblowers from positions of verifiable authority have confirmed its existence. No paper trail connects the dots between alleged participants and facilities. For most people, this absence of evidence is proof of absence. If something as significant as time travel research using children had occurred, surely some trace would remain. Yet for conspiracy researchers, this absence is exactly what they would expect from a properly classified program. The logic works like this. If Project Pegasus existed and remains classified at the highest levels, no documents would be available through normal channels. Freedom of Information Act requests would be denied or heavily redacted. Personnel involved would be bound by security oaths with severe criminal penalties for violation. Even indirect references would be scrubbed from accessible records. This explanation is convenient because it is unfalsifiable. Any evidence that supports the conspiracy can be accepted. Any absence of evidence can be explained as effective classification. The theory becomes immune to disproof while remaining superficially plausible. However, the history of government secrecy provides some support for this interpretation. Many now acknowledged programs remained hidden for decades through classification. The Manhattan Project employed hundreds of thousands of people and spent billions of dollars without the public knowing atomic weapons were being developed. MKUltra operated for years before congressional investigations forced its exposure. The key difference is that those programs eventually left traces. Documents were declassified, usually decades later. Participants came forward, sometimes protected by statute of limitations or changing cultural attitudes. The paper trails were eventually discovered because they existed, even if they were initially hidden. Project Pegasus has left no such trail. The alleged participants who have come forward lack verifiable credentials. Their testimony cannot be independently confirmed through government employment records or facility access logs. This could mean the program never existed, or it could mean the classification and compartmentalization were so effective that no verifiable traces were allowed to survive. The conspiracy theory suggests several mechanisms by which records would be eliminated. First, deep classification with access restricted to a tiny number of individuals, each knowing only their specific role. Second, document destruction after the program concluded, eliminating the primary paper trail. Third, use of contractors and front organizations to create separation between official government agencies and the actual research. These mechanisms are not theoretical. They have been documented in other classified programs. The challenge is that their effectiveness creates the same outcome whether the program existed or not. Perfect secrecy is indistinguishable from non-existence. Another factor is the nature of compartmentalization in classified research. Individuals working on specific aspects of a program might never know the full scope of what they were contributing to. An engineer developing electromagnetic field generators would not need to know those generators were being used for time travel experiments. A psychologist conducting evaluations on children would not need to know why those children needed psychological monitoring. This means, even if Project Pegasus existed, most people involved would not know it. They would have worked on components without understanding the larger purpose. Only a small number of individuals at the highest classification levels would have known the full picture, and those individuals would have the most to lose from disclosure. The absence of whistleblowers from verified positions makes sense under this model. The people who definitively know what happened are exactly the people most committed to secrecy, most legally constrained from disclosure, and most likely to face severe consequences if they speak out. Andrew Basiago himself represents an interesting case in the whistleblower problem. He was allegedly a child participant, not a researcher or administrator, he would not have access to documentation or official records. His testimony is based entirely on memory and whatever he experienced during the program. This makes his claims impossible to verify through traditional channels. If the program existed and wanted to ensure permanent deniability, using child participants who could later be dismissed as unreliable witnesses would be strategically brilliant. Their testimony would always be questioned. Their lack of official credentials would undermine their credibility. The absence of documentation they could produce would be cited as proof they were mistaken or fabricating. The parallel to MKUltra is instructive. That program remained hidden until internal CIA documents were discovered during congressional investigations. The victims and witnesses who came forward before documentation surfaced were dismissed as unreliable or mentally ill. Only when official confirmation emerged were they vindicated. Project Pegasus conspiracy theorists argue that similar documentation may eventually surface, that the true story may be revealed decades from now when current secrecy concerns no longer apply, or that the program remains so sensitive that documents will never be released. The practical reality is that without documentation, the conspiracy theory can only be evaluated based on the plausibility of the testimony and the consistency of the claims with historical patterns of classified research. It cannot be proven true, but neither can it be definitively proven false. This creates a permanent state of uncertainty that defines most conspiracy theories. The absence of evidence becomes evidence of the conspiracy's sophistication. The inability to prove the claim becomes proof that powerful interests are suppressing the truth. What remains is a choice about what type of uncertainty to accept. The uncertainty that something this significant could happen without leaving traces, or the uncertainty that testimony this consistent could emerge without underlying truth. Chapter 8. Basiago goes public for decades. Andrew Basiago remained silent about his alleged experiences with Project Pegasus. Then, in the early 2000s, he began speaking publicly. This decision to come forward transformed him from an unknown attorney into a controversial figure, at the centre of one of the most extraordinary conspiracy theories in modern history. The decision to speak out was not made lightly. Basiago knew he would face ridicule, professional consequences, and accusations of mental illness or attention-seeking. He understood that claiming to be a time-travelling child participant in a secret government program would destroy his credibility in conventional circles. Yet he chose to speak anyway. This choice itself becomes evidence in evaluating his claims. If fabricating a conspiracy theory for attention was the goal, there were far safer and more profitable options. Claiming alien contact, for instance, has a more established audience and less severe social consequences. Time travel claims involving the government carry particularly high reputational costs. What Basiago offered was not vague memories or fragmentary impressions. He provided detailed, consistent accounts of his alleged experiences. He named specific individuals he claimed were involved, including his father. He described facilities, procedures, and other participants. He maintained these stories across hundreds of interviews and presentations over more than 2 decades. The consistency is noteworthy. False memories and fabrications tend to evolve and elaborate over time. Details shift, contradictions emerge. Basiago's core narrative has remained stable. He tells the same story with the same details regardless of who asks or when. This consistency could indicate either genuine memory or a commitment to a fabricated story so complete that maintaining it became second nature. Distinguishing between these possibilities from the outside is extremely difficult. Basiago's background adds another layer of complexity. He's not obviously unstable or prone to fantasy. He holds a law degree and practiced as an attorney. His education and professional history suggest someone capable of distinguishing reality from imagination. Yet he persists in making claims that most people find impossible to believe. The personal cost of his decision to speak publicly has been substantial. His legal career effectively ended. His credibility in conventional circles was destroyed. He became a subject of mockery and dismissal rather than serious consideration. For someone seeking fame or profit, this outcome would represent catastrophic failure. Yet Basiago continues speaking. He accepts interview requests, participates in conferences, and maintains his claims despite ongoing ridicule. This persistence suggests either profound delusion or genuine conviction that what he experienced was real. The manner in which he speaks is also significant. He does not present his claims with the enthusiasm of a true believer in conspiracy theories. His tone is often matter-of-fact, even reluctant. He describes events he clearly found disturbing and traumatic. He acknowledges the implausibility of his claims while maintaining they are true. This reluctant testimony pattern often emerges from genuine witnesses to extraordinary events. They know they will not be believed, but feel compelled to speak anyway. The contrast with enthusiastic conspiracy promoters who embrace their outsider status is striking. Basiago has also refused opportunities to monetize his story extensively. He could have written sensationalized books, produced documentaries with dramatic reenactments, or built a large paid following around his claims. Instead, he has primarily given interviews and presentations without significant financial gain. This does not prove his claims are true, but it complicates the narrative that he is simply seeking attention or profit. If those were his motivations, his strategy has been remarkably ineffective. The decision to go public also exposed him to verification attempts and debunking efforts. Skeptics have examined his background, interviewed people who knew him at relevant times, and searched for inconsistencies or evidence of fabrication. While they have found no proof his claims are true, they also have not found definitive proof he is lying. What emerges is a picture of someone who appears genuinely convinced they experienced what they describe. Whether that conviction is based on real events, false memories created through some other process, or elaborate long-term fabrication remains the central question. The act of whistleblowing itself, if that is what Basiago is doing, carries a particular psychology. Real whistleblowers often face isolation, professional destruction, and psychological pressure. They lose friends, damage careers, and endure years of being dismissed or attacked. Most people would break under this pressure, yet some persist because they believe the truth matters more than personal cost. Basiago fits this profile in many ways. His persistence through adversity, his willingness to accept ridicule, his maintenance of detailed testimony despite zero official validation, these are characteristics of either profound delusion or genuine conviction born from real experience. The alternative explanation, that this is an elaborate decades-long performance for unclear purposes, requires accepting that someone would voluntarily destroy their professional life, endure constant mockery, and maintain a complex fabrication without significant reward. Both explanations are possible, neither is fully satisfying. What remains is testimony that cannot be verified, claims that cannot be proven false, and a person who shows no signs of abandoning their story regardless of consequence. Chapter 9. The pattern of time travel claims Andrew Basiago and Project Pegasus do not exist in isolation. They are part of a broader pattern of time travel claims that emerged in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Understanding this pattern helps contextualize the Pegasus conspiracy within a larger framework of temporal displacement theories. Perhaps the most famous parallel case is John Titor, who claimed to be a time traveller from the year 2036. In the year 2000 and 2001, Titor posted extensive messages on internet forums describing his mission, his time machine, and the future he claimed to come from. The posts showed technical knowledge and internal consistency that impressed many readers. Titor eventually disappeared from the forums, claiming to return to his native time. His predictions about future events proved inaccurate, which skeptics cite as proof of fabrication. Believers counter that his presence in the past may have altered the timeline, explaining why his predictions did not come true. The Titor case shares key elements with Project Pegasus. Both involve time travel claims that cannot be definitively proven or disproven. Both include technical details that suggest either genuine knowledge or careful research. Both persist in conspiracy culture, despite lack of verification. Other cases involve more fragmentary claims, reports of people experiencing missing time, finding themselves in unfamiliar locations with no memory of travel, or having inexplicable knowledge of events they should not know about. These cases are usually attributed to psychological phenomena, false memory, or simple confusion. Yet the conspiracy perspective suggests these isolated incidents might be evidence of ongoing time manipulation activities. Perhaps Project Pegasus was not shut down but continued in evolved forms. Perhaps other programs existed simultaneously. Perhaps temporal displacement has become routine within certain classified communities. The pattern that emerges across these cases involves certain consistent elements: claims of government or military involvement, technical descriptions that sound plausible to non-experts, absence of definitive proof but also absence of definitive debunking, and witnesses who maintain their stories despite social costs. This consistency could indicate either a cultural template for time travel claims, a shared narrative structure that shapes how people frame unexplained experiences, or evidence of actual temporal displacement programs that operate in ways designed to create plausible deniability. The timeline anomaly concept is particularly relevant to this pattern. According to this theory, small changes introduced through time travel create branching timelines where different versions of events unfold. In our timeline, certain events occurred in specific ways. In other timelines shifted by temporal interference, those same events unfolded differently. This framework neatly explains failed predictions and inconsistent memories. If John Titor really was from a future timeline but his presence altered events, his predictions would naturally prove inaccurate because he was describing a future that no longer exists on our timeline branch. Similarly, if Project Pegasus sent travellers into the past, their very presence might have created minor timeline shifts. The Gettysburg photograph could be evidence of this, showing a visitor from a future that may now exist on a different timeline branch than the one we currently inhabit. These explanations are unfalsifiable, which makes them both compelling and frustrating. Any evidence that contradicts the theory can be explained away by invoking timeline branching. Yet the unfalsifiability also means the theory can never be truly tested. What the pattern of time travel claims reveals is a persistent human fascination with the possibility of temporal manipulation. Whether these claims represent genuine experiences, shared cultural narratives, or something else entirely, they tap into profound questions about the nature of time, causality, and human agency. The consistency of certain details across independent claims is worth noting. Multiple alleged time travellers describe disorientation, sensory distortion, difficulty maintaining presence in the displaced time, and psychological effects that persist after returning. These similarities could indicate either contamination between stories or actual common experiences. From a conspiracy theory perspective, the existence of multiple time travel claims supports the possibility that temporal research has been ongoing for decades. No single claim proves the others, but the pattern suggests something beyond individual fabrication or delusion. The mainstream explanation is that these claims reflect cultural anxieties about time, control, and government secrecy. They express our fears about technological development outpacing ethical oversight, about powerful institutions operating beyond public accountability, about the possibility that reality is more strange and disturbing than we want to believe. Both explanations, classified time travel programs and cultural narrative patterns, are logically coherent. Neither can be definitively proven based on available evidence. What remains is a choice about which framework seems more plausible given what we know about government secrecy, scientific progress, and human psychology. The pattern matters because it prevents dismissing any single claim as an isolated delusion. Whether the claims are true or false, they represent something significant about how people process unexplained experiences and frame them within available cultural narratives. Project Pegasus, in this context, becomes not just one man's story but part of a larger tapestry of temporal displacement, claims that refuses to disappear despite determined debunking efforts. Chapter 10. What if it were true for a moment? Set aside the question of whether Project Pegasus actually existed. Instead, consider what the implications would be if the claims are true. What would it mean if the United States government successfully developed time travel technology in the 1970s and has kept it secret ever since? The implications are staggering and existentially troubling. First, history itself becomes unstable. Everything we know about past events would be potentially unreliable because those events might have been observed, influenced, or even altered by temporal travellers. The Gettysburg Address might have had future witnesses. The Kennedy assassination might have been monitored by observers from decades later. Major historical decisions might have been informed by knowledge of outcomes not yet realised in the original timeline. This creates a paradox of historical certainty. We build our understanding of the present on our knowledge of the past. If the past has been accessed and potentially manipulated by the future, our foundation becomes uncertain. Did events unfold naturally, or were they shaped by interventions we cannot detect? Second, the concept of free will becomes problematic. If government agencies can view possible future timelines, they can make decisions based on knowledge of outcomes. This might seem like wisdom, but it fundamentally changes the nature of choice. Are we making free decisions, or are we playing out scenarios that have already been observed from future vantage points? Third, the existence of timeline branching. If that is how time travel actually works, means our reality is just one version among many. Other timelines where different choices were made, different outcomes occurred, exist simultaneously. This raises profound questions about the nature of existence and identity. Are we unique, or merely one instance among infinite variations? The strategic implications are equally troubling. If time-viewing technology exists, intelligence agencies could observe enemy actions, not just in the present, but across the recent past. Nothing would be truly secret if it could be viewed retrospectively. The ability to verify historical intelligence, identify past security breaches, and reconstruct events precisely would revolutionize espionage. Time travel capability would be even more significant. Imagine being able to send observers or even agents to witness critical moments in enemy planning, to retrieve information from past timeframes, or to verify the truth about past events that remain officially disputed. The intelligence advantage would be overwhelming. Yet this technology would also create vulnerabilities. If one nation has developed time manipulation, others may be pursuing the same capability. Time itself becomes a domain of conflict, with different powers potentially interfering with each other's past or future timelines. The concept of victory or defeat becomes meaningless if outcomes can be revisited and altered. The ethical implications are perhaps the most disturbing. If the Project Pegasus claims are true, the government used children as experimental subjects in research that could have destroyed their psychological stability or worse. This represents a moral crime of profound magnitude, one that would demand accountability if ever acknowledged. Yet the very nature of time travel research might preclude accountability. If the technology allows altering past events, erasing evidence, or creating timeline branches where the experiments never occurred, how could justice ever be achieved? The perpetrators would have tools to literally escape the consequences of their actions by manipulating the temporal framework in which those consequences exist. There is also the question of why such technology would remain classified. The benefits of public time travel capability seem obvious. Historical mysteries could be solved. Scientific progress could be accelerated by learning from future discoveries. Cultural understanding could be deepened by experiencing past eras directly. The conspiracy answer is that the destabilizing effects would outweigh these benefits. If time travel exists, confirmation would shatter our understanding of causality, reality, and human agency. It would raise impossible philosophical questions about fate, free will, and the nature of existence. Social order might collapse under the weight of such profound uncertainty. From a purely strategic perspective, maintaining secrecy makes sense. A capability this powerful provides advantages only if adversaries do not know it exists. Public disclosure would trigger an arms race in temporal manipulation, potentially leading to timeline warfare that could make nuclear conflict seem mild by comparison. The control of information itself becomes different if the past can be accessed. Governments could verify or falsify historical claims with certainty. Truth about past events would no longer be determined by available evidence, but by direct observation. This power to establish definitive historical truth would be extraordinarily dangerous in the wrong hands. Consider the implications for justice. Crimes could be witnessed directly rather than reconstructed from evidence. Witnesses could be verified or contradicted by temporal observation. The entire framework of evidence and testimony that underlies legal systems would be obsolete. Yet this same power could be used to frame individuals for actions they never took, by observers claiming temporal verification that cannot be independently confirmed. The philosophical implications spiral outward into darkness. If time travel exists, the present moment loses its primacy. We are not living at the cutting edge of history, but merely existing at an arbitrary point in a temporal framework that can be navigated in any direction. Our choices do not create the future. They merely select which branch of an already existing set of possibilities we will experience. This robs human action of its fundamental meaning. If all possibilities already exist across branching timelines, our choices simply determine which timeline we experience, not what is possible or actual. We become observers of predetermined outcomes rather than creators of genuine novelty, yet perhaps the most disturbing implication is the simplest. If this technology exists and has remained secret for over half a century, what else might exist that we do not know about? What other capabilities, other programs, other violations of everything we think defines the limits of reality? The answer would be that we cannot know. The very framework that allows certainty about what is possible and impossible would be revealed as naive. We would be living in a world where the deepest truths are hidden by design, where the most profound capabilities are exercised in permanent shadow, where reality itself might be something quite different from what we are allowed to perceive. This is why the Project Pegasus claims, if true, would represent not just a fascinating historical revelation, but an existential crisis. They would force us to confront the possibility that we are fundamentally mistaken about the nature of time, reality, government, and our own place in history. Whether to prefer this uncertainty or the simpler conclusion that the claims are false becomes a question of what kind of universe we can psychologically tolerate inhabiting. Epilogue. The unprovable witness. We have reached the end of this journey through one of the most extraordinary claims in conspiracy culture. The story of Andrew Basiago and Project Pegasus remains exactly what it was when we began. Unverified, compelling, troubling, and ultimately unprovable. History has rules about what it accepts as true. It requires documentation, corroborating evidence, expert consensus, and verification through established channels. By these rules, Project Pegasus fails every test. There are no documents. There is no physical evidence. There is no expert consensus supporting the claims. The only verification comes from witnesses whose credibility cannot be independently established. Yet history also has limitations. It can only acknowledge what leaves traces. If something was deliberately hidden, successfully classified, or operated outside normal documentation channels, history would have no way to recognize it. The absence of evidence would not distinguish between non-occurrence and perfect secrecy. This creates a permanent uncertainty that defines the Project Pegasus conspiracy. Neither proof nor debunking seems possible given available information. We are left with testimony that cannot be verified, claims that cannot be proven false, and implications too vast to fully process. Andrew Basiago remains consistent in his story. He accepts ridicule rather than silence. He endures professional destruction rather than recanting. Whether this makes him a delusional fabricator, a cynical attention seeker, or a genuine witness to classified time travel experiments depends entirely on assumptions we bring to evaluating his claims. The Cold War context makes the story plausible in ways that might not apply to other eras. The technology, while advanced beyond known capabilities, does not violate physics so much as push it into speculative territory. The use of children as test subjects, while ethically monstrous, fits documented patterns of Cold War research ethics. The complete absence of documentation aligns with how deeply classified programs operate. Yet plausibility is not proof. Many fabricated stories are plausible. Many genuine events sound implausible. The test of truth requires more than internal consistency and alignment with historical patterns. What we are left with is a choice about what to do with uncertainty. Some people need definitive answers and will choose to believe or dismiss based on whatever criterion feels most comfortable. Others can sit with the ambiguity, holding the possibility that something extraordinary might have occurred while acknowledging the lack of definitive proof. The story of Project Pegasus asks us to consider what we believe about government secrecy, the limits of technology, and the reliability of human testimony. It forces us to confront our assumptions about what is possible and what powerful institutions might do when operating beyond public accountability. If time travel exists and was achieved through classified Cold War research, the first people to speak about it would sound exactly like Andrew Basiago. They would lack documentation because documentation would be classified or destroyed. They would lack corroborating witnesses because other participants would remain silent. They would have experienced something so extraordinary that their testimony would be inherently incredible. In other words, if the impossible happened, the witnesses would be impossible to believe. This is the cruel paradox at the heart of conspiracy theories about classified programs. The more successful the secrecy, the less provable the claims. The more extraordinary the technology, the less credible the testimony. Truth and fabrication become indistinguishable because both produce the same pattern of unprovable claims from witnesses, whose credibility is inevitably questioned. Perhaps this is the real conspiracy, not time travel itself, but the creation of a situation where truth cannot be separated from fiction, where genuine witnesses cannot be distinguished from fabricators, where the most profound secrets remain hidden not through force, but through the simple mechanism of incredulity. Or perhaps there is no conspiracy at all. Perhaps there was no Project Pegasus, no time travel experiments, no children sent through temporal vortexes to witness history. Perhaps there is only a man with false memories or fabricated stories, speaking to a culture hungry for mysteries and unwilling to accept the mundane boundaries of reality. We cannot know which interpretation is correct. We can only examine the evidence, consider the context, and acknowledge the limitations of what can be proven about events that, if they occurred, were designed to remain forever unprovable. The story of Project Pegasus will persist, regardless of truth. It will remain a compelling narrative in conspiracy culture, evolving slightly with each retelling, gathering new interpretations and analyses, never quite dying but never quite achieving mainstream acceptance. And Andrew Basiago will continue to tell his story, year after year, interview after interview, maintaining his claims against a world that mostly chooses not to believe him. Whether he is delusional, fabricating, or genuinely remembering participation in impossible experiments, he has become something significant, a witness to uncertainty itself. The boy who allegedly stepped outside time has ensured that time will never let his story rest. Whether it happened or not, we will continue returning to it, examining it, debating it, because it represents something fundamental about human consciousness and our relationship with the unknown. If time travel existed, if it was used on children, if Andrew Basiago really experienced what he claims, then his testimony is one of the most important historical revelations imaginable. If none of it happened, if it is all false memory or deliberate fabrication, then his testimony reveals something equally important about how humans process reality, construct narratives, and give meaning to experiences that may never have occurred. Either way, the story matters. Either way, it forces us to confront questions we would prefer to avoid. Either way, we are left with the uncomfortable realization that there are things we can never know with certainty, witnesses we can never fully believe or dismiss, and possibilities that remain forever suspended in the space between impossible and unproven. The sun sets on another day. Time moves forward, or so we believe. Somewhere perhaps the truth about Project Pegasus sits in a classified file, waiting for a future that may never arrive. Or perhaps there is no file, no truth, nothing but testimony echoing in the darkness. We close tonight's story where we began, uncertain, unsettled, and unable to look at time quite the same way as before. If you made it this far, thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most fascinating and troubling corners of conspiracy culture. Whether you believe or dismiss, we appreciate you lending us your time, something that, if tonight's story is true, may be far more strange and manipulable than any of us want to acknowledge. Sweet dreams, wherever and whenever you are. The reflective gateway. The Kozyrev mirror files. Before we begin tonight's journey into one of Russia's most disturbing psychological experiments, I want to ask you something. If you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps this channel far more than you could possibly know, and it allows us to keep bringing you these deep dives into the unexplained. Also, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, but only if you want to share. Tonight's story comes from a suggestion by Lipchin, so thank you for bringing this chilling case to our attention. What you're about to hear involves real Russian experiments, real scientists, and real facilities that operated in secret for decades. The Kozyrev Mirror project was not fiction. It existed. The question is not whether these experiments happened, but what exactly they discovered inside those spiralling chambers of polished aluminum, and why, after one particular session in December of 2003, the entire program went dark overnight. The session that went wrong. The clock read 11:47 in the evening when Anton Belikov stepped into the chamber. December 18th, 2003. The Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine in Novosibirsk hummed with the low mechanical sound of ventilation systems pushing cold Siberian air through concrete corridors. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. This session was unofficial, private, the kind of experiment that doesn't appear in grant proposals or peer-reviewed journals. Belikov was 31 years old, a physicist specializing in what the Soviet scientific establishment had once called torsion field dynamics. Tonight, he would be both researcher and subject, entering the Kozyrev mirror alone for extended perception study. The chamber stood before him like a polished cocoon, its spiralling walls of aluminum sheeting catching the fluorescent lights in strange dancing patterns. His colleague, Viktor Sokolov, monitored the external instruments, temperature sensors, electromagnetic field detectors. A single video camera pointed at the chamber's small observation window. The equipment was standard for these sessions, though Victor would later tell investigators he felt uneasy that night. He said the building felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had become thicker. Belikov entered the chamber at 11:51. The spiral design was based on the theories of Nikolai Kozyrev, the controversial astrophysicist who believed that time itself could be manipulated, reflected, even stored like energy in a battery. The aluminum walls curved inward in a precise mathematical spiral, creating what Kozyrev had called a temporal funnel. Inside this funnel, test subjects reported enhanced psychic abilities, out-of-body experiences and perception of distant events. Some reported other things too, things the official reports carefully omitted. The first 3 minutes proceeded normally. Victor watched through the observation window as Belikov sat cross-legged on the chamber floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The monitoring equipment showed expected results: slight temperature fluctuation, minor changes in the local magnetic field. Nothing alarming. At minute 4, Belikov opened his eyes. At minute 5, he began screaming. Victor would later describe the sound as inhuman. Not the scream of someone in pain, but of someone confronting something their mind refused to process. Belikov pressed himself against the curved aluminum wall, his eyes wide and fixed on his own reflection in the polished metal surface across from him. "They're watching," he shouted. "People watching from behind the reflection. They're standing in a corridor made of spirals. Oh God, they're not people. They're not." His words dissolved into incoherent sounds. Victor rushed to open the chamber, but the locking mechanism jammed. Through the window, he watched Belikov claw at the aluminum walls with his bare hands, fingernails bending backward, then tearing away as he scraped metal in blind panic. "Don't let me go back," Belikov screamed. "The voice says I can't return, says I shouldn't return, says if I go back I'll bring them with me." Victor finally forced the lock open 6 minutes after the screaming began. Belikov lay unconscious on the chamber floor, his fingers bloody, his eyes still open but rolled back to show only white. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words Victor couldn't hear. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, but they weren't from the city hospital. They wore unmarked uniforms and carried no identification. Security personnel Victor had never seen before confiscated every document in the lab, every hard drive, every notebook. The video recording disappeared. Anton Belikov vanished from public life before sunrise. The Institute released a brief statement the following afternoon. "Research Associate Belikov has been transferred to another facility for continued work. We wish him well in his future endeavours." No one who asked about him received answers. His apartment was emptied within 48 hours. His university records were sealed. His parents, when contacted by friends, said only that Anton was recovering and couldn't take visitors. But here's what makes this case truly disturbing. The Institute claimed Belikov had been transferred, yet according to leaked security logs that surfaced years later, he was never transferred at all. He was moved to Facility 12A in Yakutia, over 2,000 miles to the northeast, to a research station that officially did not exist. The question no one could answer was simple. What did Anton Belikov see in his reflection that destroyed his mind in 5 minutes? The real science. To understand what happened in that chamber, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when the Soviet Union invested heavily in what Western scientists dismissed as pseudoscience. Back to Nikolai Alexandrovich Kozyrev, the astronomer who believed he could prove that time itself was alive. Kozyrev was born in 1808 in St. Petersburg. By his 20s, he had already established himself as a brilliant astrophysicist, publishing papers on stellar evolution and planetary atmospheres. But in 1936, during Stalin's Great Purge, he was arrested and sent to a labour camp on false charges of counter-revolutionary activities. He spent 11 years in the Gulag, where many scientists died or had their spirits broken. Kozyrev survived, and when he was released in 1947, he returned to astronomy with an obsession that would define the rest of his life. He became convinced that time was not merely a dimension through which events occurred, but an actual physical energy that flowed through the universe. He believed time could be measured, manipulated, and most importantly, reflected. His colleagues thought he had lost his mind in the camps. The Soviet scientific establishment marginalized him. But Kozyrev continued his research with determination that bordered on obsession. He conducted experiments with gyroscopes, pendulums, and rotating masses, claiming to detect subtle changes in weight that he attributed to time flow. His papers were rejected by mainstream journals. His funding dried up. Yet certain branches of Soviet military intelligence took notice. By the late 1970s, during the height of Cold War paranoia, both the United States and Soviet Union poured resources into parapsychology research. The Americans had their remote viewing programs at Stanford Research Institute. The Soviets had something else. They had Kozyrev's theories about time and consciousness, and they decided to test them. The first Kozyrev mirrors were constructed in the early 1980s at a laboratory outside Moscow. The design was elegantly simple. Large sheets of polished aluminum were curved into precise spirals based on mathematical formulas Kozyrev had developed in his later years. The subject would sit inside this spiral, surrounded by their own reflection multiplied and distorted by the curved surfaces. The theoretical basis was that the spiral shape would focus time energy, similar to how a parabolic mirror focuses light. Inside this focus, Kozyrev believed, human consciousness could be amplified. Subjects might be able to perceive distant locations, access information from the past or future, or even communicate with other minds across vast distances. The initial results were, according to declassified reports, promising but inexplicable. Test subjects reported vivid out-of-body experiences. Some accurately described events occurring in distant locations at that exact moment. Others spoke of perceiving multiple timelines simultaneously, watching alternative versions of their own lives unfold. Temperature measurements inside the chambers showed anomalous cold spots that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Electromagnetic field detectors registered spikes that coincided with subjects reporting intense psychological experiences. The Soviet military became very interested. Between 1982 and 1991, the Kozyrev mirror program expanded dramatically. Multiple facilities were established across the Soviet Union, each conducting their own variations on the basic experiment. The largest and most sophisticated installation was built in Novosibirsk at the Institute of Clinical and Experimental Medicine, where conventional doctors and physicists worked alongside parapsychology researchers. Hundreds of sessions were conducted. Most produced the expected results: mild perceptual alterations, enhanced intuition, occasional remote viewing success. But a small percentage of sessions produced something else, something the researchers hadn't anticipated. Some subjects began reporting encounters with entities. The first documented case occurred in 1986. A military remote viewer named Alexei Petrov entered a mirror chamber for a standard session. 15 minutes in, he began describing a presence in the chamber with him. Not another person, he insisted, but a consciousness. He said it felt ancient and cold, and it was aware of him. It knew he was there. When Petrov emerged from the chamber, he seemed normal at first, but over the following weeks he became increasingly paranoid. He claimed he could still feel the presence, that it had followed him out of the mirror. He said he would see it in reflections, a shadow that moved wrong, a face in glass that wasn't his own. 3 months later, Alexei Petrov walked into traffic on a Moscow highway during rush hour. Witnesses said he was looking behind him when he stepped into the road, as if fleeing from something only he could see. The incident was classified. The research continued. More cases followed. Not many, but enough to create a pattern. Roughly 5% of subjects who spent extended periods in the mirrors reported similar experiences, feelings of being watched, sensations of presences in the chamber that weren't visible but felt overwhelmingly real. And in a handful of cases, visual phenomena, shadows in the reflections that moved independently, shapes that appeared when the subject looked away but vanished under direct observation. The official explanation was psychological stress combined with sensory deprivation effects. The mirrors created unusual conditions, the researchers argued, and human perception was notoriously unreliable under stress. The incidents were noted, filed, and the program pressed forward. But then something changed in the late 1980s. According to leaked memoranda from that period, the Soviet military ordered the most advanced mirror installation moved to a remote location in the Arctic. The official reason given was improved atmospheric conditions for enhanced signal clarity. The facility was established in Yakutia, near the village of Batagai, in one of the most isolated regions of Siberia. The unofficial reason, whispered among researchers who worked on the project, was that too many test subjects were reporting encounters, and some of those subjects were high-ranking military officers whose testimony could not be easily dismissed as delusion or psychological breakdown. The mirrors were no longer just tools for psychic research. They had become something else, something that seemed to open channels to places human consciousness was never meant to access. And the government wanted those channels as far from populated areas as possible. The journalist who opened the case. Elena Marchek didn't believe in conspiracies. After 15 years as an investigative journalist in St. Petersburg, she had learned that most alleged cover-ups were simply bureaucratic incompetence mixed with human error. Real conspiracies were rare, boring, and motivated by money rather than mystery. So when an unmarked package arrived at her apartment in March of 2007, she almost threw it away without opening it. No return address, no postage marks, just her name written in careful block letters on brown paper. Inside was a VHS tape, nothing else. No note, no explanation. The label read, Kamir 03 Belikov Incident. Eleanor hadn't owned a VHS player in years. She had to borrow one from her elderly neighbour, connecting it to her laptop through a decade-old capture device she found in a drawer. The video quality was poor, the timestamp in the corner barely legible. December 18th, 2003, 23:51 hours. The footage showed a curved aluminum chamber from a fixed camera angle. A man in his 30s sat on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The video had no audio. For the first 4 minutes, nothing happened. The man simply sat, meditating or concentrating. Elena almost stopped watching. Then, at minute 4 and 37 seconds, the man opened his eyes. He stared at something off camera, his expression shifting from calm to confusion to absolute terror in the span of 3 heartbeats. His mouth opened in what was clearly a scream, though Eleanor could hear nothing. He scrambled backward, pressing against the chamber wall, his hands raised as if warding something off. Eleanor leaned closer to her laptop screen. That's when she noticed it. In the reflection on the polished aluminum wall behind the man, something moved. A shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the lighting. But it moved wrong, independently of the man's movements, and for just a fraction of a second, Elena saw what looked like a silhouette. Tall, too tall, with proportions that didn't match any human she had ever seen. She rewound the tape and watched again. There, in the reflection. A shape that appeared when the man wasn't looking at that section of wall, vanishing the instant his gaze swept across it. And then she saw the eyes. 2 points of darkness in the reflection that blinked. Not in sync with the man's blinking, but independently, slowly, deliberately. Eleanor felt her skin prickle. She told herself it was video compression artifacts, shadows from poor lighting, her own imagination filling in patterns where none existed. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just watched something that should not have been recorded. Something that should not exist. She checked the timestamp again. December 2003, Novosibirsk. But when she examined the tape more carefully, she found something strange. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a facility designation. Facility 12A, Yakutia. Not Novosibirsk. Yakutia. Over 2,000 miles away. Elena pulled up maps on her laptop. Yakutia was one of the most remote regions in Russia, a vast territory of permafrost and isolation. The designation Facility 12A appeared nowhere in public records. No research institutions, no military bases, nothing. Someone had lied about where this footage was recorded. Or the official story about Anton Belikov being in Novosibirsk was false. Either way, Eleanor now had evidence of something being covered up. She spent the next 2 weeks digging through archives, contacting former Soviet researchers, and following dead ends. Most people she contacted refused to speak about Kozyrev mirrors. Those who did claimed the program had been shut down in the early 90s, dismissed as Cold War-era pseudoscience that produced no useful results. But one name kept appearing in her research, Yevgeny Malikov, a former technician who had worked at multiple mirror research facilities before the Soviet Union collapsed. He had vanished from public life in the mid-90s, but Elena eventually found him living under an assumed name in a small apartment in Vladivostok. She flew east, taking 3 connecting flights to reach the Pacific port city. Malikov agreed to meet her in a cafe near the harbour, but only after she sent him a photograph of the VHS tape as proof she had evidence. He was 63 years old, thin and nervous, constantly glancing at the cafe entrance as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. His hands shook when he lifted his teacup. Eleanor showed him the tape on her laptop. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It was sent to me anonymously. Can you tell me what I'm looking at?" Malakoff watched the footage in silence. When the man in the video began his silent screaming, Malakoff closed his eyes. "That's Belikov," he said. "I knew him. Good man, brilliant physicist. After this session he was never the same. What happened to him? Officially? Transferred? Unofficially? They took him to Section 7. Section 7? Malakoff looked around the cafe again before answering. A psychiatric facility that doesn't appear on any maps. It's where they send people who see things in the mirrors, things that break them. Eleanor leaned forward. What things? You saw the video. You noticed the reflection, yes? The shape? Elena nodded slowly. The mirrors weren't just for psychic experiments, Malakoff said. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. After years of sessions, we began to realize something. The mirrors were receiving information, patterns, coordinates, symbols that shouldn't exist, and sometimes voices. Voices? Recordings would show electronic voice phenomena, whispers in languages no one recognized. One researcher claimed to hear his own voice speaking words he hadn't said yet, describing events that hadn't happened but later did. Elena felt a chill despite the warm cafe. Are you saying the mirrors showed the future? No, Malakoff said firmly. That's not what I'm saying. The mirrors didn't show the future. They showed something trying to communicate across time, something that exists in the spaces between moments. He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet and slid it across the table. It showed a massive aluminum chamber, far larger than the one in Yelena's video. The structure spiraled upward in a cathedral-like space, its polished surfaces catching light in hypnotic patterns. The reflective gateway, Malakoff said. The largest mirror ever built. It's still at Facility 12A in Yakutia. After Belikov's incident, they sealed it. But the facility is still there, still guarded. Guarded? Why would they guard an abandoned research station? Malakoff met her eyes. Because the mirrors don't reflect you, Elena. They reflect something trying to be you, something that knows when you look in, and the gateway is still active. Before Elena could ask more questions, Malakoff suddenly stood up, his face pale. He was looking past her toward the cafe entrance. Elena turned but saw nothing unusual. Just ordinary people entering and leaving. I have to go, Malakoff said urgently. Don't try to contact me again. Burn that tape, forget you ever saw it. Wait, I need... But he was already moving toward the back exit, leaving money on the table. Eleanor watched him disappear into the alley behind the cafe. She waited for several minutes, expecting him to return, but he never did. That night she returned to her hotel and found a message on her phone from an unknown number. They know you have the tape. Be careful. Eleanor didn't sleep well. She kept thinking about what Malakoff had said. Something trying to be you. She thought about the reflection in the video, the shadow that moved wrong, the eyes that blinked independently. The next morning she learned that Yevgeny Malakoff had been reported missing. His landlord said men in suits had come to his apartment the previous evening, claiming to be from a government agency. Malakoff had left with them voluntarily, carrying a single bag. The police refused to file a missing persons report, insisting Malakoff had simply moved away. Elena knew better. She also knew she was now in danger, but she had spent 15 years chasing stories, and this was the biggest story of her career. A secret Soviet program that might have discovered something impossible, evidence of cover-ups spanning decades, and somewhere in the Arctic, a facility that still operated in complete secrecy. She made a decision that would change everything. She would find Facility 12A herself. She would document what she found, and she would expose whatever the Russian government was hiding in those spiraling aluminum chambers. What Elena didn't know was that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Journey to the Arctic. Getting to Yakutia required careful planning. The region was vast, isolated, and heavily monitored by military installations due to its strategic location. Eleanor couldn't simply fly into the nearest city and start asking questions about secret research facilities. She needed a cover story. She arranged a freelance assignment to write about climate change effects on permafrost communities. It was plausible enough. The Batagai crater, a massive permafrost collapse near where Facility 12A supposedly existed, had been featured in scientific journals worldwide. Her editor approved the assignment, and in late April of 2007, Eleanor flew to Yakutsk, the regional capital. From Yakutsk, she hired a local guide named Dmitri, who owned a truck suitable for the brutal terrain. She told him she wanted to visit Batagai village and document the crater. What she didn't tell him was that she planned to search for a facility that officially didn't exist. The journey took 3 days across roads that barely deserved the name. Endless forests gave way to tundra, rivers frozen even in late spring, and a landscape so vast and empty it seemed to exist outside normal reality. Dmitri spoke little, which suited Elena fine. She spent the drive studying satellite images on her laptop, searching for any sign of unusual structures near Batagai. She found something on the second day of driving. About 15 miles northwest of Batagai village, barely visible in the satellite imagery, was a rectangular clearing in the forest, too regular to be natural, and leading to it, partially obscured by tree cover, was what looked like a maintained road. When they arrived in Batagai village, Eleanor spent 2 days talking to locals supposedly about climate change, but really fishing for information about the facility. Most people were friendly, but curious about her real purpose. But on the third day, an elderly woman named Katya pulled her aside after seeing Elena studying maps. "You're looking for the spiral building," Katya said. It wasn't a question. Elena's pulse quickened. "Do you know it?" "Everyone here knows it. The soldiers used to come through our village for supplies. They said they were doing atmospheric research, but we knew better." "What did you know?" Katya's expression darkened. "Bad things happened at that place. People went in wrong. Some people who worked there, after the building closed, they weren't the same. My cousin worked as a cook there for 2 years in the 90s. When she came back to the village, she wouldn't look in mirrors anymore. She covered every reflective surface in her house, said she didn't like what looked back. Is she still alive? Can I talk to her?" "She died in 2001, walked onto the ice during spring thaw, drowned in the river." Katya paused. She was looking behind her when she went in. Several people saw it, like she was running from something. Eleanor felt the same chill she had experienced watching the Belikov tape. Where is the facility exactly? Katya drew a map on a napkin. A river, a ridge, a clearing. "But I wouldn't go there if I were you. The soldiers still patrol sometimes, and there are reasons they keep it guarded, even though everyone says it's abandoned." "What reasons?" "To keep the cold spirits inside," Katya said simply. "That's what my cousin called them, the cold spirits that live in the mirrors." Eleanor thanked her and returned to where Dmitri was waiting with his truck. She showed him the map Katya had drawn. "I need to go here," she said. Dmitri studied the map and shook his head. "That's not part of our agreement. That area is restricted." Eleanor doubled his fee. He thought about it for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. They left before dawn the next morning, following logging roads that deteriorated into barely navigable tracks. The forest here felt different, darker somehow, even in daylight. The trees stood silent and dense, their shadows stretching in strange directions. After 4 hours of driving, they found the access road Katya had described. A chain-link fence blocked the entrance, but time and weather had bent it enough to create gaps. A faded sign in Russian red, "Government property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." "This is as far as I go," Dmitri said firmly. Elena nodded. She had expected this. She gathered her camera, digital, recorder and backpack. "Wait here. If I'm not back in 4 hours, leave." "I'll give you 6, Dmitri said, lighting a cigarette, "but not a minute more." Elena squeezed through the gap in the fence and started walking. The road continued for another 2 miles through dense forest. Her GPS showed she was heading in the right direction, though the signal was weak this far north. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her footsteps on broken pavement. Then she saw it. The facility emerged from the trees like something from another world. A brutalist concrete structure, 3 stories tall, with small windows and weathered walls. Several outbuildings surrounded it, all showing signs of abandonment. Broken glass, rust, vegetation, reclaiming what humans had built. But the main building looked maintained. The doors were intact. The windows, though dirty, weren't broken, and fresh tyre tracks marked the ground near the entrance. Someone had been here recently. Eleanor approached carefully, the camera recording everything. The front entrance was locked with a modern digital keypad, incongruous against the decades-old architecture. She circled the building and found a ground-level window with a broken lock. It took several minutes of effort, but she managed to pry it open enough to squeeze through. Inside, the facility smelled of cold metal and something else she couldn't identify. A chemical scent, like ozone after lightning. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, meaning the building still had power. Elena's footsteps echoed as she moved through corridors lined with closed doors. She found the main laboratory on the 2nd floor. It was large, cathedral-like, with high ceilings and exposed pipes, and filling the room, like strange aluminum sculptures, were the mirrors. Dozens of them, all different sizes, some small enough to hold a single person sitting cross-legged, others large enough to walk inside. Each one was a spiral of polished metal, reflecting and refracting light in dizzying patterns. Eleanor felt disoriented just looking at them. She moved through the room slowly, documenting everything with her camera. Old notebooks were scattered on workbenches. She flipped through one and found session logs, dates, names, results. Most entries were clinical and brief. Subject reported enhanced perception. Session concluded normally. But some entries were different. Subject claims presence in chamber. Visual confirmation impossible. Session terminated early due to psychological distress. Another, temperature drop of 12 degrees recorded during contact event. Subject unconscious. Hospitalized. And another, written in a shaky hand. The reflections are watching. They know we're here. We need to stop. Eleanor felt her skin crawl. She pocketed several notebooks and continued exploring. At the far end of the laboratory, she found a reinforced metal door. The lock was electronic but had been damaged, leaving the door slightly ajar. Eleanor pulled it open and found stairs leading down. The basement level was colder. Much colder. Her breath became visible in the air. The walls here were different, lined with sound-absorbing foam and some kind of metallic mesh. At the end of a long corridor she found another door. This one was massive, like a vault entrance, with multiple locking mechanisms. It was open. Beyond was a circular chamber at least 40 feet in diameter and dominating the space. Rising from floor to ceiling in a perfect spiral of polished aluminum was the largest Kozyrev mirror Elena had ever seen. The reflective gateway. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The spiral was mathematically perfect, each curve flowing into the next with precision that must have required incredible engineering. The polished surface caught the dim emergency lighting and multiplied it, creating the illusion of infinite depth. Eleanor approached slowly, the camera forgotten. She felt drawn to it, as if the structure itself exerted some kind of pull. When she was close enough to touch the aluminum, she noticed something strange. The surface wasn't entirely reflective. In some areas it seemed translucent, as if the metal had become thin enough to see through to something beyond. She reached out to touch it and stopped. In her reflection, something moved, just a flicker at the edge of her vision. She turned quickly but saw nothing behind her. The chamber was empty except for her, but when she looked back at the reflection, there it was again, a shadow where no shadow should be. Eleanor's rational mind screamed at her to leave. Every instinct told her this place was wrong, dangerous, that she should run back the way she came and never return. But the journalist in her needed to know, needed to understand what this structure was and what it did. She found a control panel near the entrance. Most of the buttons and switches were labelled in Russian technical jargon she could barely understand. But one switch was clearly marked, Gateway Activation. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment. This was insane. She was about to activate Soviet-era equipment in an abandoned facility. Equipment that had been sealed for years. Equipment that had apparently driven multiple people to psychological breakdown. But she'd come this far. She had to know. She flipped the switch. For several seconds nothing happened. Then a low humming began, so deep she felt it in her bones rather than heard it. The emergency lights flickered. The temperature dropped further, and Elena's breath came out in thick clouds. The aluminum surfaces of the gateway began to glow faintly, as if generating their own light from within. Elena watched, transfixed, as her reflection became sharper, clearer, more defined than any normal reflection should be. And then her reflection moved wrong. It was subtle at first, a delay of a fraction of a second, as if the reflection was lagging behind her actual movements. Elena raised her hand. Her reflection raised its hand a heartbeat later. She turned her head. The reflection followed, but slowly, as if moving through something thicker than air. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. She should leave. She should run. But she couldn't look away from the mirror. Couldn't stop watching her own reflection behaving like something that was almost her, but not quite. Then her reflection smiled. Eleanor wasn't smiling. Her face was frozen in an expression of growing horror. But in the gateway's surface, her reflection's lips curved upward in a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. The reflection's smile widened. Its eyes, her eyes, focused directly on her with an intensity that felt alien, wrong. And then it spoke. Elena heard no sound, but she saw the reflection's lips move, forming words. "You found us?" Every rational thought in Eleanor's mind collapsed. She stumbled backward, nearly falling, her camera clattering to the floor. The reflection didn't move with her. It remained in place, standing in the gateway's surface, watching her retreat with that terrible smile. Eleanor felt it then. The sensation that had driven Anton Belikov to tear his fingernails off, clawing at metal. The overwhelming awareness of being watched by something vast and cold and patient. Something that had been waiting for someone to open the gateway again. Something that wanted to step through. The reflection began to walk forward. Not backward as reflection should move, but forward, toward the inner surface of the aluminum. Its hand reached out, pressing against the metal from the inside, creating a visible distortion in the surface. Elena grabbed her camera and ran. She ran through the corridor, up the stairs, through the laboratory filled with smaller mirrors. Behind her she heard a sound like metal groaning, like something trying to force its way through a barrier never meant to hold it back. She reached the window she'd entered through and threw herself outside. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her camera. She ran through the forest, branches tearing at her clothes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, through the trees, she heard the facility's emergency alarms begin to wail. Eleanor ran until she found the road where Dmitri waited. His eyes widened when he saw her state. Dishevelled, terrified, covered in scratches. "We need to leave," she gasped. "Now! Drive! Please! Just drive!" Dmitri didn't ask questions. He started the truck and drove as fast as the terrain allowed. Eleanor looked back through the rear window, half expecting to see something following them, but the forest remained still and empty. They were 10 miles away when they saw the military trucks approaching, 3 of them, moving fast along the access road toward the facility. Someone had triggered an alarm, or maybe the gateway had triggered it automatically when activated. "How did they get here so fast?" Elena asked. "They were probably already nearby," Dmitri said, his voice tight. "They patrol this area. Everyone knows that." Too fast, Elena thought, as if they had been waiting. as if they knew someone would eventually try to access the gateway. They reached Batagai village after dark. Elena paid Dmitri the rest of his fee plus extra for his trouble. He took the money without comment, but before driving away he said, "Whatever you saw in there, forget about it. Some things are meant to stay buried." Elena spent that night in a village guest house, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her reflection smile. Every shadow seemed to move wrong. She checked her camera footage, but most of it was corrupted, showing only static and distorted images. The few clear frames showed the gateway's spiral surface, but her reflection appeared normal in the recording. Only she knew what she had seen. Only she knew what had tried to reach through. The next morning, Elena fled Yakutia on the first available flight. But escaping the region didn't bring her peace. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something had followed her out of that chamber, that activating the gateway had opened a door that couldn't be closed. Escape and pursuit. Elena reached Moscow 3 days later, travelling through a series of connecting flights designed to make her movements harder to track. She was being paranoid, she told herself. There was no reason to believe anyone was following her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that had settled over her since leaving Facility 12A. A crawling sensation between her shoulder blades, the constant urge to look behind her. She checked into a budget hotel under a false name and spent the first night reviewing what little footage from her camera had survived. Most of the video was corrupted beyond recovery, but she managed to salvage several still images of the gateway and a few pages from the notebooks she had photographed. The handwritten session logs were more disturbing the more she studied them. One entry from October 2002 read, "Subject 7 reported entity claiming to be from outside time. Entity provided specific coordinates and dates. Coordinates verified to match undiscovered archaeological site in Kazakhstan. Discovery confirmed 3 months later. How could subject have known?" Another from January 2003. Multiple subjects now report same entity. Describes itself as observer. Says it has always watched. Says it wants to come through. Recommend immediate suspension of gateway testing. The recommendation had been ignored. Testing continued for another 11 months, until the Belikov incident in December 2003. Elena began writing her article, documenting everything she had discovered. The history of the Kozyrev mirror program, the testimonies from researchers like Malikov, the continued operation of Facility 12A despite official claims of abandonment, and her own experience in the gateway chamber. She knew no mainstream publication would touch it. The story was too strange, too unverifiable. But there were alternative media outlets, online platforms that specialised in investigating government secrets. She began reaching out to contacts in that world. On her 4th night in Moscow, someone knocked on her hotel room door. Elena froze. She hadn't told anyone where she was staying. The knock came again, polite but insistent. Through the peephole she saw 2 men in business suits. Not police uniforms, not military, just nondescript suits that could mean anything. "Elena Marchek," one of them called through the door. "We know you're inside, we just want to talk." Elena's mind raced. There was a window, but she was 6 floors up. The bathroom had no exit. She was trapped. "We're not here to hurt you," the man continued. "We're from a special research division. We know you visited Facility 12A. We know you activated the gateway. We need to ask you some questions." "I have nothing to say," Elena called back. "Then just listen. The gateway is dangerous. You experienced that firsthand, but there are protocols for dealing with exposure, medical evaluations, psychological support. We can help you." It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Elena remembered Yevgeny Malikov leaving with men in suits who claimed to be from a government agency. He had never been seen again. "Go away," she said. "I'll scream. I'll call the police." There was a long pause, then, "The police can't help you with this, Elena, and you're going to need help. The effects of gateway exposure don't always manifest immediately. Sometimes they take days, weeks. You'll start noticing things. Small things at first. Reflections that don't quite match. Shadows that fall wrong. The feeling of being watched even when you're alone." Eleanor felt cold despite the warm room. How did they know? How could they describe exactly what she'd been experiencing? "We monitor gateway exposure cases," the man said, as if reading her thoughts. "We know the progression. Right now you're in the early stages, heightened paranoia, perceptual distortions. But it gets worse, Elena. Much worse. Eventually you'll see them clearly. The things that live in the spaces between moments. And once you see them clearly, they can see you too. They can find you." Elena's hands shook as she grabbed her laptop and camera. She shoved them into her backpack along with the notebook she had stolen from the facility. "Last chance," the man said. "Open the door, let us help you, or we'll be forced to take official action." Eleanor didn't respond. She moved into the bathroom, locking that door as well, and opened the small window. It was barely large enough for her to fit through, leading to a narrow fire escape she had noticed when checking into the hotel. She had chosen this room specifically for this possibility, though she had hoped she wouldn't need it. She heard the hotel room door crash open as she squeezed through the bathroom window. Shouts. Footsteps. Eleanor didn't look back. She climbed down the fire escape as quickly as she dared, her backpack bouncing against her spine. She hit the ground running and disappeared into Moscow's maze of side streets and metro stations. She knew the city well from her years as a journalist. She knew how to disappear. For the next week, Eleanor lived like a fugitive. She moved between different hotels each night, paid in cash, avoided cameras, and trusted no one. She continued working on her article, expanding it into a full report with every piece of the evidence she had gathered. She prepared multiple copies, saving them to cloud, storage services under anonymous accounts. But the men's words haunted her. "You'll start noticing things." She was noticing things. Her reflection in mirrors seemed off, as if looking at her from a slightly different angle than it should. Shadows in her peripheral vision moved when nothing was there, and the feeling of being watched had grown into a constant, oppressive presence. Was it psychological trauma from her experience in the gateway, or was something genuinely following her? She couldn't tell the difference anymore. 10 days after fleeing the hotel, Eleanor made contact with an editor at an alternative media website based in Finland. He was interested in her story but wanted verification. Could she provide sources, witnesses? The stolen notebooks weren't enough without context. Eleanor decided to risk one more interview. She tracked down another former researcher from the Mirror program, a woman named Irina Volkov who had worked at the Novosibirsk facility in the 90s. Irina agreed to meet, but only in a public place. They met at a crowded cafe in St. Petersburg, Eleanor's home city. Irina was in her 50s, nervous but willing to talk once Elena showed her the notebook pages. "I know these logs," Irina said quietly. "I wrote some of them. We all thought we were advancing science, exploring the boundaries of human consciousness. We didn't realize what we were actually doing. What were you doing? Opening doors, creating channels. The mirrors don't just reflect physical light. They create resonances in whatever field consciousness exists in, and something on the other side of that field noticed. Something that had been waiting for a very long time." "Waiting for what?" "For a way through," Irina said. "That's what we eventually realized. The entity's subjects reported weren't hallucinations. They were real presences existing in dimensions or states we don't have words for. And the mirrors, especially the gateway, were creating weak points where those presences could push through into our reality." Elena leaned forward. "Did anyone ever make it through? Did anything ever cross over completely?" Irina's expression darkened. There were incidents, cases where test subjects changed after prolonged exposure. Subtle changes at first, different speech patterns, different behaviour, like something was wearing them. We called them contamination cases. They were sent to Section 7 for observation. What happened to them? I don't know. Section 7 cases were classified above my clearance. But I heard rumours. People said the contaminated subjects weren't people anymore. They looked like people, moved like people, but something else was looking out through their eyes. Before Eleanor could ask more questions, Irina suddenly stiffened, staring past Elena's shoulder toward the cafe entrance. Elena turned and saw 3 men in suits entering. They weren't looking around like normal customers. They were scanning the room with purpose. Time to go, Irina whispered. They left through the back exit and separated immediately. Eleanor took a taxi to the train station, then caught a train heading south. She spent the journey looking out the window, watching her reflection in the dark glass. Her reflection was smiling. Eleanor blinked and looked again. Her reflection was normal now, showing her actual expression of fear and exhaustion. But for a moment, she had seen it. That same deliberate smile from the gateway chamber. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and recorded a video message. Speaking quickly and quietly, she summarized everything she had discovered. The Kozyrev mirror program, Facility 12A, the gateway, the entities, the contamination cases. She uploaded the video to multiple cloud storage accounts and set them to automatically publish if she didn't check in within 48 hours. If something happened to her, at least her research would survive. The final transmission, the last known communication from Elena Marchek, came in the early morning hours of May 15th, 2007. She called her editor from a disposable phone. Her voice rushed and tight with panic. "They found me," she said. "I don't know how, but they found me. I'm in Pskov, near the Estonian border. I was going to try crossing, but there are men watching the roads. They're dressed like civilians, but I know they're looking for me." Her editor tried to keep her calm, told her to go to the police, to the embassy, anywhere safe. "You don't understand," Eleanor said. "It's not just them. There's something else. I keep seeing it. My reflection. It's following me. Every mirror, every window, every reflective surface. It's always there, always watching, always smiling. Sometimes I see it when there shouldn't be any reflection at all." There was a long pause on the recording. "I think I brought something back from the gateway," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or maybe it followed me. Maybe activating that machine created a connection, a channel, and now it's using that channel to find me, to get closer." Her editor asked if she was okay, if she needed medical help. "I'm not crazy," Eleanor said firmly. "I know how this sounds, but I saw the reports from Facility 12A. I know what happens to people with prolonged gateway exposure. First the reflections act strange, then you start seeing things that aren't there. Then you realise they are there, and they've always been there, and the gateway just made you able to see them." Another pause. "I sent you everything," Elena said. "All my research, the notebooks, the photographs, the interviews. If something happens to me, you have to publish it. People need to know what the government was doing, what they're still doing, what they found in those mirrors." Her editor promised to publish everything, asked her to stay safe, to stay hidden until they could figure out how to help her. "It's too late for that," Elena said. "I can feel it getting closer. It's not just in reflections anymore. Sometimes I see it standing in corners where there shouldn't be shadows. Sometimes I hear it whispering in voices I recognise. My mother's voice, my own voice, saying things I never said." The line went quiet except for Elena's breathing. Then, "There's someone at my door. Multiple people. They're not knocking, just standing there. I can see their shadows under the door." Her editor told her not to open it, to stay quiet, to wait for them to leave. "I don't think they're going to leave," Eleanor said, "and I don't think they're people, not anymore. I can see their reflection in the window. They're standing at my door, but their reflections are all wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving independently of their bodies." Muffled sounds came through the phone. Footsteps, a door opening, Elena's sharp intake of breath. "They're wearing uniforms," she said. "Government identification. But their eyes are wrong. They're looking at me, but also through me, at something behind me." A man's voice in the background, speaking Russian. "Elena Marchek, you need to come with us." "Where are you taking me?" Eleanor's voice on the recording. "Section 7. For observation and treatment. You've been exposed to harmful energies. We can help you." Eleanor laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. "Section 7. Where the contaminated cases go. That's not a hospital. That's where you put people who've been replaced. People who aren't people anymore. Please don't make this difficult." "What happened to the real people?" Elena asked. "The ones who came back from the gateway changed. Where are they? Are they still in there somewhere, trapped in their own bodies while something else wears them like clothing?" No answer from the men. That's what happened to Belikov, isn't it? Elena continued. That's why he screamed about people watching from behind the reflection. Because there were people trapped on the other side, and things wearing their faces over here. The recording became confused, sounds of struggle, Elena shouting, then sudden silence. When her editor called back, the phone was disconnected. Elena Marchek disappeared that night. The police in Pskov had no record of any incident at the hotel where she had been staying. The hotel itself claimed no one by her name had been registered. Her credit cards went unused. Her phone stayed offline. Her apartment in St. Petersburg was found empty, cleaned out completely. Friends and family were told she had left the country suddenly for a freelance assignment. No one could say where. After several months with no contact, she was officially listed as a missing person. After a year, most people assumed she was dead. But the story doesn't end there. The horror twist. 14 months after Elena Marchek's disappearance, a file appeared on several encrypted forums popular among conspiracy theorists and government whistleblowers. The file was labelled simply "Mirror Contamination Contained." Inside was a single-page document, heavily redacted, from an organisation identifying itself only as Research Division 7. The document read, "Subject EM retrieved successfully on May 15, 2007. Gateway exposure confirmed via psychological markers and physiological indicators. Subject displayed advanced contamination effects including autonomous reflection behaviour and trans-temporal perception bleed. Standard containment protocols implemented. Subject showed resistance during initial processing but cooperation achieved through therapeutic intervention. Replacement integration deemed successful after 32-day observation period. Subject released into population on June 20, 2007. Monitoring continues. Mirror contamination contained. No risk to civilian population. Case closed." Attached to the document was a grainy security camera photograph. The timestamp read June 22, 2007. The location, Leningradsky railway station in Moscow. The photograph showed Elena Marchek walking through the crowded terminal, carrying a small bag, dressed in casual clothes. She looked healthy, normal, like any other traveller passing through one of Russia's busiest stations. But something was wrong with the photograph. Something that made anyone who studied it closely feel a crawling sensation in their spine. Eleanor's reflection in the glass wall behind her wasn't quite right. The angle was slightly off. The timing was delayed by a fraction of a second. And most disturbing of all, the reflection was smiling. Not the smile of someone happy to be travelling, not the smile of pleasant anticipation, but a slow, deliberate smile that didn't match Eleanor's neutral expression in the photograph. A smile that suggested something behind her eyes was pleased to be walking free in the world. The leaked document spawned immediate debate. Was it real or fabricated? Was Elena actually alive, or was this disinformation? Several people claimed to have seen her in Moscow, St. Petersburg, even as far away as Berlin. But no one could produce concrete evidence. Her editor tried to verify the sighting, but hit dead ends everywhere. The security footage from that day at Leningradsky station had been erased. The station authorities denied any record of the original image, but the photograph circulated online, analysed and debated by thousands of people. Image analysis experts pointed out the reflection anomaly. Skeptics called it doctored. Believers saw it as proof that something had been done to Elena Marchek, that she'd been taken, processed and sent back as something else, something wearing her face. The debates continue to this day. Some people claim to have encountered Elena in various Russian cities, always noting something off about her behaviour. Too calm, too controlled, speaking in patterns that don't quite sound natural, and always, smiling at odd moments. Others say these sightings are mistaken identity or hoaxes, that Elena Marchek died in 2007, probably killed to silence her investigation, that the leaked document and photograph are elaborate disinformation designed to discredit her research. But those who study the Kozyrev Mirror program closely, who have dug through the fragmentary records and talked to surviving researchers, they tell a different story. They say the mirrors weren't just tools for psychic research. They were gateways to something else, something that exists in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between one instant and the next, something that watches from reflections, something that knows when you look, something that has been waiting for a very, very long time to find a way through, and perhaps, after decades of experiments and hundreds of test subjects, it finally succeeded. Not through direct manifestation, which seems to be impossible, but through replacement, through wearing people like clothing, walking around in stolen bodies, learning to move and speak and smile just enough like the original to avoid detection. The Kozyrev mirror program is officially defunct. Facility 12A is officially abandoned. The gateway is officially sealed. But satellite imagery from 2012 showed fresh tyre tracks in the snow outside the facility, and leaked communications from 2015 reference ongoing temporal perception research at undisclosed locations. Some programs never truly end. They just go deeper underground. They continue in places with no names, monitored by organisations with no public existence, studying phenomena that officially don't exist. And somewhere, in some secure facility buried beneath permafrost or hidden in empty steppe, the gateway still stands. Its spiralling aluminum surfaces still gleam. Its mathematical curves still focus something that shouldn't be focused. Still creating channels. Still opening doors. Still letting things through. Things that know how to smile at the right moments. Things that have learned to wear human faces. Things that walk among us, watching from behind stolen eyes, waiting for the next person to activate another gateway, waiting to bring more of their kind across. And every time you look in a mirror, every time you catch your reflection in a window or a screen, remember Elena Marchek. Remember how her reflection smiled before she did. Remember that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Remember that something might be looking back, something that's learning, something that's waiting for its turn to step through. The Kozyrev mirror program is over, they tell us. The research has been discontinued, they assure us. The facilities are sealed, they promise. But promises are easy to make when the truth is too disturbing to acknowledge. When the truth is that we opened a door to something vast and patient and utterly alien. Something that exists just beyond the moment, just outside perception, waiting in the spaces between heartbeats and thoughts. Something that finally found a way to cross over. And it's learning to be human, one reflection at a time. This has been the story of the reflective gateway, the Kozyrev mirror files, and what Russian researchers may have discovered in those spiralling chambers of aluminum. Whether you believe it or not, whether you think Elena Marchek is alive or dead, replaced, or simply vanished, remember one thing. Pay attention to your reflection